Okay, speaking of Meja, I'd like to introduce her. Meja Goodman is an instructional designer here at the Lean Enterprise Institute with an extensive background in educating learners across all age groups. Her foray into education began in 2000, initially as a high school teacher in French and comparative world religion. Meja embarked on her Lean journey in 2006 when she first joined LEI. There, she was instrumental in forming the Lean Global Network. After a hiatus to spend time with her young children, she rejoined LEI in 2016. A lifelong learner, she earned her Master of Education in E-Learning and Instructional Design in 2019, a timely achievement given the global shift towards remote education. A significant aspect of Meja's learning has been through trial, error, failure, and curiosity, which has contributed to her versatile and innovative approach in education. Her dedication to developing engaging and practical online Lean learning experiences is evident through her work. And in her free time, she embraces an active lifestyle with her family, often found practicing yoga or hiking or climbing in New Hampshire's mountains and spending time with her puppy. Also, as a colleague of Meja's, really looking forward to her presentation today. Meja, I'll turn things over to you.
All right, thank you so much, Matt. I was only going to tell people that I've been successfully teaching for 40 years, that's 40, how to say my name. That's Asia with an M in front. Now you know. Welcome, everybody. Now that you know a little bit about me, I'd love to know a little bit about you. So this would be a great time to use the reactions button. If you are in charge of team members development, please give a little reaction. And that might not be an official title, but that's probably part of your job, I'm guessing. If you're a manager, if you're a leader, seeing lots of reactions there. Okay, that's good to know. And are you a Lean leader of some kind? Maybe that's specifically part of your team member development job. Still seeing lots of thumbs, that's great. And I'm also curious, I'll pause a second for all the reactions to zoom up. Have you taken an online class before? Okay, quite a few people. All right, so the game question, we'll get back to this. It was what I like to call an intentional icebreaker, not a random icebreaker, but there's a reason for it. Let's think back to the game you mentioned, or maybe a different game that you love, and just in your own head, think about how did you learn this game? What were some of the process steps? Who was involved? Where were you? And I'm curious if a practice round of some sort was part of it. I saw some of the games were sports, soccer from somebody, I think, in Portugal. So were there scrimmages involved? Were there, I don't know, an open hand in cards where you play the cards on the table and everybody kind of looks and then you get going? Practice tends to be a pretty big part of how we learn things, even if it's in a small way. But also just playing the game, I'm guessing, was a big part of it. That's how you learned the game, was you played it, right? Somebody's asking what I mean by practice round. So it could be a simulation, it could be a scrimmage, like in, oh, my sound quality isn't good, people are saying. Is that any better?
Yeah, you're coming in fine to me, Meja. I think it looks like most through the chat are okay as well.
Okay, I saw a lot of thumbs once I pulled the mic closer to my face. I'll just kind of hold it here. We'll see until I forget. Sounds underwater for some people, good for other people. Oh boy, I'm not sure how to adjust that at the moment. It might take a minute later to try it out. Okay, so my next question is, and you can answer this one in the chat, please. Why do we play again and again, the same game? Why doesn't it get boring? Why do we go back? And I'll give you a moment to answer in the chat. You see progress, to get better because of variation, to win, to improve, want to get better. Awesome. There's challenge. I'm guessing part of the challenge is wondering, can I get better? Can I beat my previous score? Like in Wordle, there was a lot of Wordles out there. There's interaction, absolutely. There's a social element. To win, there's some competition. All right, this is great. Thank you. Lead. I would say the same goes with learning lean, that we could apply these same ideas to learning lean, that we could have a challenge that we're there to try to reach, or we go back because there's variation. We don't know exactly what's going to happen. Have you ever found yourself watching a terrible movie and you can't stop watching because you just have to know what happens? And somebody says, I don't understand why you're not turning it off. Yes, says Miguel. So the same can happen with if we create some kind of open loop in where we're not sure what's going to happen with this experiment that we run. And that motivates us to do these experiments. It motivates us to get better at the work that we're doing. So I would say all these ideas that we have around how we learn to play games and why we go at it again and again, we can apply that same mentality to to lean. I was going to share a story that I told a friend. I was on my way to go practice yoga, and she said, oh, I didn't know you play yoga. And I loved that idea of yoga as play. I think we could think the same for lean. All right. So today's purpose, to be very clear, I want us all to kind of discover ways that we could leverage our online modules to inspire our own teams who we're in charge of developing to play lean, right? That's where they're really going to learn it deeply, is playing it on the job. But we have to get them prepared for that. This is where this idea of the practice round comes out. All right, so how are we going to do that? We have an agenda here. We will look at one of our courses. This is the breakdown of it chapter by chapter. And then we will look at a specific module in it. We're just going to look at one module from one course, just look at that and experience it together deeply. And from there, we can have this discussion of how could we leverage it. And of course, we'll have some time for giveaways and Q&A. All right. So here we go. I'm guessing this is something we've all seen before. This is a typical training slide. And it can be very efficient. It's a very quick way to make your key points fast, fast, fast. But what do you think? Is this particularly effective? Have you ever found yourself in a training where it just tells you things and then you end it and you think, I get this in theory, but I'm not sure how it applies to my work. And then you go back to your work and you kind of forget all about it. That's what we're trying to avoid. There is another way. I'm seeing one thumbs up on that. One person can relate to it. That's good. A few other reactions. So there are other ways, and there are times when this is perfectly appropriate. I don't mean to dismiss this type of a slide, but there are other approaches. So let's look at one. I'm going to open up our course, the Work Improvement Learning Journey. And I'm just going to pause. I'm not seeing my green square around it. Can people see this learning portal? Yes. Okay, great. Maybe some of you have seen this before. Maybe some of you have not. We break down all of our lessons by some chapters. So I'll just do a quick rundown of what this looks like. You can expand a chapter and click on a lesson. When you click the complete continue button, then it marks a lesson as complete over here. So you can pick up where you've left off. You know what you've already checked out. And if you have a question on any particular lesson, you can open up this discussion board. I did that by pushing this button. And you can create a post and ask your question. Sometimes it's really helpful to see what other people have written. Somebody said it's a great way to connect with people playing games. You can also connect with people here and learn from their perspectives and their work. All right, I think that's enough about the portal itself. Let's get into this one particular lesson. Now, look, this lesson is designed for you to go through by yourself. So I apologize ahead of time that I will be reading to you, but I promise I don't think you're a child. I'm just reading to you so that we can all go through this together. All right, sharing success. Let's try it out. Let's see if we can influence others. So we have to imagine here that you are the general manager of one restaurant called The Ranch, and it's part of this chain of restaurants. And the Seaside restaurant over here, they have found a lot of success with lean. So today, you and your team from The Ranch, you're going to go check out Seaside's model kitchen layout. Your staff, which is maybe similar to your staff, is a little bit cynical, a little bit enthusiastic, a lot of people in between. But how you respond to them will affect their confidence and their motivation. And you'll see those scores here at the bottom. To be very clear, our purpose today is to inspire our teams to run their own lean experiments back at the ranch. Okay. Are we ready? Good. Here's the model site kitchen layout. I'm going to ask you to use the chat here and tell me where would you like us to go first. We could go to receiving, the walk-in, prep stations, pass-through coolers, cooking stations. Where do we want to go? Receiving, says Ed. Okay, Ed, we're following your lead. Oh, and John. Oh, okay, we've got a few people. Approaching us right away is Julia, and Julia does not mince words. She is asking, she's going right for the jugular. Why are we doing this? How should we respond? You can tell me with an A, B, or C in the chat. Should we encourage her to explore, relate to her work, point out specific improvements? All right, I saw two A's first, so I'm gonna go with the A first. We're gonna encourage her to explore. That's what we chose. And she says, sure, I can walk around. We've seen this before, I suspect. She got distracted. It didn't work out so great. What do you think? How did this affect her confidence and motivation? You can just answer in your head if you want. My guess is bummer. Yeah, Alistair, lower motivation, lower confidence too. And she just wants to go back to her real job. That's all she really wants to do at this point. So the point is that as a leader, we need to encourage some curiosity and some discovery. And we didn't really help her do that, just giving her free rein. That wasn't particularly helpful for Julia in this case. It might be helpful with a different employee. I don't know. All right, where should we go next? Yeah, Mason, she had no direction or engagement. Yeah, really good call. Caitlin says freezer. Let's go check out the freezer. All right, part of Seaside's team approach involved studying how many tomatoes they used on their busiest night. And it was far less than they thought. This is based on a real story, I'm not kidding. As a result, they adjusted how they store, prepare, and order produce, including tomatoes. Sophia here, she is positive that Danny would never risk adjusting his current system, especially with pasta. They serve a lot of pasta. She says he orders and preps this much because it's better than running out mid-rush. Is anyone here, I'm going to pause before you give me which answer we should go with. Thumbs up if you have ever worked in a restaurant. I would be one of those thumbs. Yeah, so we can relate to this mid-rush and what a nightmare it would be if you ran out with a key ingredient like pasta in the middle of the rush. All right, so I saw a lot of B's. Let's ask her to explain. Sophia, what are you talking about? So she says, remember that crazy busy Saturday? We ran out of pasta. He yelled at that kid. There's always some poor young kid working in the kitchen. He quit on the spot and we had to comp 4 meals. And ever since then, he's erred on the side of prepping and parboiling too much pasta. And he stores all that stuff, which takes up extra space and it gets in my way. Because maybe we could measure how much pasta we use on a busy night, just like this team measured the tomatoes. Didn't they say it was way less? Okay, what do you think? We have any better luck with Sophia than Julia? Yeah, we did. You asked questions, you engaged her in the tour, and you got her to think more specifically about how the changes connected with her own work. Yes, Doug, it helped make her curious. And she's like, hey, we got to try some of this for ourselves. Awesome, that's exactly what we want. We just want her to go play lean, and she's ready to go play at this point. So a key point is to connect what you see with problems team members are already experiencing. I'm just going to pause for a second. This module sits in in chapter 8 of the work improvement learning journey. So you've already learned a little bit about observation at this point. So you should know exactly what problems your team members are experiencing because you've already observed them in this learning journey. All right, where next? We'll see how much time we have. I don't know if we'll have time to get through all of these, but we'll do what we can. Prep stations. I like that we've gone in a very like tidy top to bottom order. All right, at the prep station, you hear about the 13 tomato rule. Remember the tomatoes? It's nearly a chant in this kitchen. You can hear it in your head. 13 tomatoes in one shift. I won't sing to you. All right, Bobby here is very inspired. And he says, man, if we only sliced 13 tomatoes, our prep time would go way down. We all know what side work and prep time looks like in the kitchen, maybe some of us. It's not the best part of the job. So he's excited to have this idea. How should we respond to Bobby? Well, I think I saw 2 A's first. Ask what support he needs. We're being good, supportive lean managers here. And he says, look, it's pretty straightforward. I don't think we'll need help with doing less work. He is amped and ready to go. So you say to him at this point, okay, just make sure that we determine the standards based on real customer data. And of course, share your plan for communicating new standards to everyone else who works the prep station. Otherwise, we've got some people doing 13 tomatoes, some people doing 15 or 50 or who knows what. All of a sudden, it's like you just spoke Greek to him. Bobby's pretty confused. How does this affect him? Just don't tell, says Jared. Yeah, it might not be great. Let's find out. His motivation is still there. He's pretty psyched with this idea of reducing the prep time. But the extra questions, they made him lose his confidence a little bit. And it's important to point out that he was confusing efficiency with efficacy. He was all psyched for this 13 tomatoes rule, but he was forgetting to connect it with his customer's behavior and his customer's need. And that's okay. He's still motivated, so we have an opportunity to coach him. It'll be all right. Says, I'm not sure how to get to our own vegetable chant, but we'll figure it out. So the key point, connect improvement efforts with things customers care about. We're not improving for the fun of it. We're improving because it actually leads to customer value. So in this case, the tomato. All righty. Where should we go next? Ron, breaking the pattern, going out of order. Good for you. All right, your team has never seen cook stations set up like this before. Each one has its own purpose. There's 5 different stations you might have noticed. So let's take a look. Head chef Nala would love to know a little bit more about this. And she asks, how did they divide the work across these stations? What should we do? One vote from Mason for C. Let's do it. Invite her to view their work charts. After all, earlier in this course, we learned about visualizing work, so this makes sense. We'll go look at the work charts. So she's looking at them. It's okay. How does this relate to our site? Our numbers would be all different. And she kind of left saying, I can't say that I understand how those visuals would help us or how they relate to the 5 different cooking stations. What do you think? How's Nala doing? This might be surprising. It went down in both. Now look, it's not that it's bad to share the visuals, it's just that we didn't connect with her. Once again, we kind of left her on her own and didn't ask her questions. So she's kind of turned her back on Lean here, which is a bummer. She couldn't make sense of these visuals by herself. It wasn't self-obvious. And she's really struggling to see how the changes here relate to the changes that they might want to make back home. So she was really focused on the changes. Why would the same changes work in a different situation, she asks. It's a pretty legitimate question. And the key point here is that we actually want to focus more on the principles behind the changes rather than the changes themselves. And that might help some people see how it can relate to their own work. Let's see. I think we have time for the last one. I'm not going to ask you to vote because there's only one left. So pass-through coolers. Approaching the pass-through cooler, you point out the lean principle at play. It's like you just learned the last lesson. Grocery store style cooler, it loads from the back, you pull from the front, and it helps with first in, first out. You don't accidentally have tomatoes rotting on the back of the shelf. Andre has some thoughts to share about this. He says, look, At the ranch, we have a much smaller kitchen. We don't have space for a pass-through cooler. How do we want to respond to Andre? B, B, B. I see a lot of B's right after. Okay, ask about what is similar. Let's do it. Because yeah, I hear you. First in, first out for freshness. That's pretty obvious. And guess what? We already have a way to do that. We always pull from the left in the walk-in cooler. Let's see, Andre. His confidence. Confidence is pretty good, but his motivation, not so good. He's pretty sure he already has this all down. Yes, John, he seems pretty confident. He isn't particularly motivated to try something else because he thinks he's already got it. He's like, hey, this is easy. We're already lean. I'm seeing some reactions. Can you relate to some of these characters and some of these scenarios? Yeah, okay. So the lesson here, to approach lean situationally, differences in application are clearly expected. Okay, we've all experienced this in our own lives. So look, we got through all these 5 stations and all of a sudden there's a couple more buttons over here. We can look at our score. We started at the midpoint and confidence and motivation went down a little bit. We could type in here what we might want to do different next time. We also could replay if we'd like, and it'll set all these things back. So maybe instead of trying A on this first one, we might want to test out what B does. Okay, there's also a place to learn more where you can open a job aid. You can connect to hear the real story. This links to a post in lean.org. And we can also join the discussion. Just want to see if this one works. So this is looking back again where somebody said connecting with other people. We focused on confidence and motivation. Maybe you focus on something else. You could share that here and see what other people say as well. All right, so I'm going to jump out of here now and come back to this. And I'm just curious, what was different? And by what was different, I mean between a slide like this and what we just experienced in the journey. So a little sneak peek. We could have done this. I could have shown you this slide with all these key points. Yeah, it was interactive. It was a little more engaging. You were with them. And I'm even going to ask, I'm seeing a lot of engagement, which is great. John says it also made us think, made you think more. That's great. Easier to remember. Wow, there's a Nala with an H. I didn't even know that I'd have somebody with the same character name. It became more personal, said Caitlin. Absolutely. You're seeing it in context. So instead of it just being this fuzzy theory that sounds so obvious, you're seeing what's tricky about it in context. Now, granted, these characters are maybe a little exaggerated in their reactions to you. I hope your own employees are not quite so reactionary, but you never know. People come in all walks, right? Jason says it was more meaningful. Good, good, good. So what we're trying to do here is go from this fuzzy theory, very cerebral side of a journey. We're taking the small learning path. It has to be small because our brains can only handle so much at once. We're trying to get over to this land of transfer where we can then get some hands-on doing behind it. Okay? So that's what we're trying to do here. If you're wondering why the word innovative was in our title, that's part of how we're trying to innovate, is just we're thinking a lot about how to get from theory to transfer, or you might call it application, or you might call it practice, or incorporating it in your work is what we're talking about. All right, so that was a couple things. I'm curious how, now that you've seen a specific module, how might we leverage these? This is where I would love to see your ideas in the chat. And I'll just ask one question that you can give a reaction to is, did you have to work in a restaurant to see how this could relate to your work? Let me ask that a different way. Does this relate to your work even if you don't work in a restaurant? Okay, yeah. I asked it in a way where it didn't make sense to give a thumbs up. Okay, that's great. So part of what went into designing this module is we often hear, I think everywhere in education, we often hear, I get it in theory, I don't see how to apply it to my job. And so that is part of the intention here is, again, we're trying to make that get across that bridge. Diane thinks, but maybe all her colleagues won't get it. That's okay. It's an opportunity to discuss. And I'll just share, Diane, something similar is, so the US military has used similar modules, this kind of, make your own journey, choose your own journey type of modules. They used it for some really serious work before sending troops to Afghanistan so that they could prepare young American soldiers who had never left the country how to interact with an Afghan person in, yes, Kathy Moore's action mapping. Yes, Caitlin, how to interact with people in a different culture. So you can imagine all the ways that could have gone wrong if they didn't think about it. And what they did was they did a module like this, and then they discussed it together as a team. So to your point, Diane, if your team didn't get it, that's okay. It's a launching point for a discussion. Jerry says he feels like it could work for group training, practice applying concepts virtually. Yeah, exactly. So we're trying to provide a space where it's perfectly fine to fail. You saw your own score. It got you thinking and reacting. No one else sees that. I can't see it. No one at LEI sees your score on this module. So it's a very safe place to fail. All right. I'll just share a couple other thoughts. You can keep sharing ideas here. But building off the practice round idea in your games, that's what we're doing. We're just providing a place for people to practice. And just like something like chess, we're never done learning it, right? Just like we're never done learning medicine or, I don't know, the meaning of life. We're always still learning it. We're always still learning lean as well. But we want to get people to the point of really playing it. So you can learn the rules of chess up front, sure, but you're going to learn a lot more by playing it. And then as you become a more and more advanced player, then you start pulling for specific resources that can help you further. All right. Paul mentions group learning is a good idea. We can generate a lot of conversation. Yep, and give different answers. Hospital scenario, our staff was confusing and left many out of the conversation over and over. They changed the scenario to a hotel. Oh, that's really interesting. So it sounds like what Laura's saying, it was better for them to put the scenario in a different industry. Maybe it made it, people were maybe more open-minded to thinking about it in a different industry, less attached to the way they currently do things. Emotional intelligence, yeah, absolutely. All right, so here's a few more ways. You could have your team individually go through the whole course. You could also look at one chapter, try to apply those lessons at your work, and then go to another chapter. So just breaking it down a bit more. You could also maybe start with where you are on a work project and then pull for resources as you need them. All right, so if you are familiar with all the different resources in the course, you can then pull as needed. All right, so key points, just having this playful mindset, and hopefully you can see that we're trying to have our modules allow space for learning to occur. So I didn't teach at you too much in that module. It was more giving you space to discover things, have a practice round, and of course, it's a flexible collection of lessons. Some of the giveaway, we will have time for Q&A here, but some of the giveaways, I think Taylor is going to put them in the chat for you. We'll link to this module. It'll be outside of our portal, but you can use that and play around, click buttons yourself. We also have a coupon for the work improvement bundle, which will be in the chat. And also we've shared some other ideas for leveraging these modules. Thanks, Taylor. I see you put them there. The work improvement bundle, I'm just gonna explain what this is very quickly. It includes our 3 newest courses. And for a single user, $250, but for your whole enterprise, your whole company, unlimited users is for $2,000, which is a pretty good deal, I would say. How they relate to each other, this is the breakdown of the one course we looked at. The work observation practice, it provides an alternative method for these first 4 chapters. So in here, we get into the 3 C's. Over in the work observation practice, we get into the process study sheet, that type of thing. Taylor, the link isn't showing for everyone. If you didn't see the link, we will also include it in the follow-up email. So no stress. The problem definition practice is a deeper dive on how to align on the gap by defining it. All right, so that's how these courses relate to each other. I'll pause here and stop sharing, and I'll just see what questions come up. Thanks, everybody.
Misha, that was great. Super engaged from the engagement from the audience, which was nice to see. So just real quick, Taylor, I think, by the way, Taylor Asaki, one of our other colleagues, is on the back end supporting some of the tech. It looks like the chat is only set to host and panelists. So if you set that up to everybody, Taylor, you should be able to get those links out to everybody. So we'll start the Q&A. Some people submitted questions before the webinar began as part of the registration. So I'm going to kick things off with one of those. As you have questions, please submit them. And the questions that you want answered, go ahead and click the thumbs up button so we can see what the group wants to hear about. But first, Beja, what concepts of adult learning are embedded within the training? Yeah,
oh boy.
Start there.
Yeah, I could do a whole nother webinar on that. Not that I'm volunteering for that, but I'm just sharing. I could talk a long time about this. Thanks, Renee. I see you're mentioning in the chat. We've got a lot of people in this group who are educators, trainers, leaders. I'm very curious what this group thinks about that before I continue talking. What did people see in that last module where you saw evidence of adult learning principles at play? Doug says action learning. Joseph's curious about the 3 C's. Sure, I can answer that separately. Connecting to the work, it was visual. There was some reading. Safe, fun, engaging, self-directed, yeah. So I don't know if the person asking that question was talking specifically about Malcolm Knowles and andragogy, but self-directed learning is something that he does talk about, and that we naturally want to have some control over our own self-evaluation and also over just our own learning. So that's a piece of it, that it allows you to navigate. We don't lock the navigation in our portal. If you want to skip a lesson, if you want to go forward, that's fine. Yeah, there's some tacit learning there. That's great. I'd also mention a couple other pieces. If you are not familiar with Clark and Mayer's research on multimedia design, their research probably had the biggest influence on this. And some of the things they talk about is, actually, I broke this rule. I'll admit it to you. I was reading the slides to you because it's not supposed to be read out loud. You're supposed to follow it by yourself. But did you find yourself reading the slides and then you're like, oh, she's saying something, but you were reading the slides? Can I just see a thumbs up if that was you? You found yourself reading more than listening? Yeah, that happens. So that's all of us. We naturally read things. You might have noticed this too. If you have closed captions on your TV, but you can still hear it, you might find yourself reading even though you can hear it. It's a subconscious thing that we do. Yes, Caitlin, cognitive load, absolutely. So the researchers, Christina, are Ruth Clark and Richard Mayer. They have some fascinating research on multimedia design. And a big part of it is what Caitlin just mentioned, is reducing cognitive load. So there wasn't a lot of superfluous visuals on the screen. We tried to keep it pretty tight. We tried to keep buttons in the same place and only have a slide look really different if it was for a purpose. So those key slide points slides were significantly different for a reason. And that's to help cue you as a learner. You didn't have to think too hard about where to click or where the buttons were going to be or where the text bubble was going to appear, that type of thing. Okay, you're welcome, Christina.
Okay, I'll turn things over to some of the questions coming in through the live Q&A. Luis,
sure.
He asks, how do you address concerns that online instruction cannot be as effective as in-person instruction?
Oh yeah, it's a great question. So one that's helpful to know is there's a lot of research on this, and I think it's so natural human nature to resist something that's new and different, right? And even though e-learning has been around for a while, I took my first remote course in 1997 so that I could live abroad for a year in high school. We still kind of resist it a little bit. So there's a lot of research demonstrating that online learning is as effective, sometimes more effective than in-person classroom training. And so just like any training, there's a broad range, right? If it were nothing but bullet points, it's not going to be as effective, and it won't have as much stickiness. It won't last as well as something that's a little bit more interactive where you have to think along the way. So that's one piece. And then it can be well, I'll just say one more thing about that. I really like this question. I like to think of online learning as a proxy for on-the-job learning, not as a proxy for classroom training. And I think if you make that shift in your mind, that can help quite a bit. I'll leave it at that.
Well, can you actually share more about that? So you mean you're trying to, the training is designed to not mimic classroom learning, but really assist in the actual work somebody's going to be doing? Is that what you mean by that, Misha?
Yeah, exactly. What does it look like in context? So just like in that module, we could have rattled on about the importance of these different key points, but instead you got there through a little bit of travel on your own by making some decisions and getting there. And that's the type of work we face every day. Somebody, I forget who it was, in the chat mentioned Kathy Moore and action mapping. So this is another person who heavily influences my own work. Her name's Kathy Moore, Kathy with a C, M-O-O-R-E. And her idea of action mapping is training should solve some kind of problem, right? So those of us who are A3 thinkers, right? If we break down a problem, identify the gap, we have some hypotheses of why that gap exists, and then we try a countermeasure. This training, it's all countermeasures, right? We're trying to get people to do something to help them with making their daily decisions. That's what it comes down to help impact their daily choices and actions. So once you start from there, then you work backwards, and it affects how you design something.
Next question here is, I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly, Girish. He asks, about what's the approximate development time for a module like you showed today, Misha?
Oh, sure. So that module, I worked with my colleague Lori to try to get the visual design down, and that took about a week. And then the rest of the scenes, so it's 5 scenes, one I developed with Lori. Those last 4 scenes and all the added material at the end, I did in the last week.
Fast.
So it wasn't the only thing I was working on, but that's how it fit into my workflow.
But you mentioned this briefly during the presentation, but I think it's worth mentioning again. But the module that Misha showed, this is based off of an actual work, work that LEI participated in, working with a restaurant organization. And so the content that you'll see, it occurred in real life. And so we're trying to create not imaginary scenarios, but real examples. So next question here. This is more of a practical one. What lean topics or areas do you have covered in the trainings available now?
Oh, sure. So in all of our on-demand training, or particularly to these 3 new ones?
Maybe break out the share about both.
Okay. So we have Intro to Lean Thinking and Practice, which helps kind of cover the basics, and it breaks it down in terms of the Lean Transformation Framework, if you're familiar with that, which is built around 5 questions. So that's the framework for that course. Intro to Problem Solving gets into, I mentioned early, A3 and A3 thinking. It gets into that methodology and thinking. It's built on the Managing to Learn book. And we also have learning to see using value stream mapping, which is a value stream mapping training course. That one comes with some live training, some live coaching. So you can sign up for one-on-one coaching to help you along the way with building your first value stream map. Let's see, what else do we have for? I think that's it. You can also buy those as a bundle. It's called the Lean Fundamentals Bundle. And similar thing, you can buy access so that your whole organization has access for 6 months at a time. The new courses, the work improvement learning journey, we focus on, someone was asking about the 3 C's. So this is where we look at, one of them you'll be very familiar with. We're looking at breaking down the work in terms of what's value, what's necessary but non-value creating, and what's waste. That's one of the C's. And then another C is looking at, is it difficult? Are people struggling? So for example, like opening a prescription bottle, doing that all day, it might look like nothing, but that's torture on your wrist. So something like that, even being able to recognize struggle in work. And also if it's unsafe. So this can sometimes go hand in hand. That's the second C. And then the third is breaking it down in terms of, is the work step you're seeing cyclical? Does it happen regularly every time? Or is it periodic? So like going to fetch supplies is pretty periodic. It's not part of your daily routine of, making a cheeseburger. And then, or is it abnormal? It would be the other part of those C's. So that's what the 3 C's are about. That's in the work improvement learning journey. It also gets into how to visualize so that you can see things in relationship to, say, tact, and have a sense of how does the work design relate to customer demand. And it gets into running experiments, improving through just looking at ways to improve at each individual job element level. And then the work observation practice gets more into the process study sheets. So that's where you're doing more of a time study and building out an operator balance chart. And the problem definition practice gets more into, for the most part, type 2 problems, which is where you have a clear gap from standard. You could use the same ideas to show a gap from some kind of reach goal as well. So a type 3 problem.
And in the follow-up email that we send, after the webinar, it'll include links to all this information, so you'll be able to explore on our site, and of course, reach out if you have any questions. We have a couple more questions in the Q&A here. This one's from Diane. Do you use articulate storyline to create your courses?
Yes. Yep. You know it.
That was easy. All right. I'm going to ask one more question from the questions that came in from the registration, but unless others appear, we might be able to wrap up a little bit early. So what are best practices learned by doing in a virtual environment?
Oh, sure. Well, hopefully that served as an example that you try to imitate a work environment so people are having to make decisions in context. Another great example of this is in training people before, remember the Ebola outbreak in Western Africa, this was quite a few years back, to train doctors and medics to go and help out in that. They had to be very good at knowing how to leave a contaminated area. And so it was very similar. They had a very simple layout of a room, and then you had to choose. Do you get hand sanitizer, or do you take off your pair of gloves, or do you touch the door, or do you wash your hands in the sink? And depending on the order you did that, it would give you really realistic feedback. So I'd say those are the important things, to have a realistic context and feedback for what would happen. And in that situation, some of the feedback could be you got some of your colleagues sick. So it's a very, very real world feedback. So though we're playing, it's playing in service to doing some very serious work.
It reminds me of the concept of like a dojo, where you see in some, especially manufacturing facilities, where they'll set up a training area that mimics the actual workstation an operator will experience, and the operator is essentially getting, real world practice, but not in the real production environment. Which is always very effective. I said we didn't have any questions left, but one snuck in there in the chat. This one's from Paul. Has this been tested with people with limited understanding of lean concepts, or more appropriate for those with some level of understanding?
Oh, sure. Thanks, Paul. That's a good question. Let's see. So one thing that we have as part of the design is that there's times when you can see how you're doing, such as with that module, and there's times where we are looking to get a sense of, is it designed to meet the needs, and are we getting are the objectives being met of the people taking it? So because these are new, we're still looking at this, but I'll share with you one of the ways that we're testing that. This is a little bit of a peek behind the curtain. So I'm being very anti-Wizard of Oz here. Some of the reflection questions, discussion questions are designed so that we can see if people are getting the key point that we want them to get. And I won't say too much more about that because I don't want to give too much away, but that's where we can test and see if this works well. And then that helps us do our own PDCA to see if that works. Anti-Wizard of Oz. Yes, transparent might be a better word, Caitlin. Thank you.
And then Veronica had a question come in here. If we purchase the enterprise version of this training, will we have the ability to see participant progress? For example, who has completed which modules? If so, how is the information available? Is it a live dashboard, a weekly report, or something else?
Yes. You can have one person be what we call a group analyst, and that person from your company has access on that same portal, just a slightly different page of it. You can go in and see a report to see who has made what progress. You can see what they have viewed and what they have marked as complete. And this is something that we have a small explanation and training for to get you set up. We showed someone last week how to do that, and in 5 minutes he was set up and good to go to be a group analyst.
Caitlin asks, can it integrate with SuccessFactors, Learning, or other learning management systems?
Sure, thanks, Caitlin. So some specific, there's a number of ways I could answer this. We keep everything on our own learning portal at the moment. It's something we could do customized, is make things in a way that you could upload it on your own LMS. Since things are made for the most part in Articulate or Adobe, that's pretty LMS agnostic. So it should work, but that would be a separate thing if you did want it to be in your own LMS. Thanks for asking.
The questions keep trickling in here, which is great. Clark asks, do you have languages other than English or a plan to roll out?
Oh, that's great. Right now, we only have English. We are part of a Lean Global network. And so our sister organizations around the globe have their own trainings in other languages. And I'd be happy to point you to those. But right now, all of our training is in English.
Okay, I don't see any other questions come in. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining. And thank you, Meja, for hosting this webinar. If you missed any bit of it or want to share it with colleagues, we will have this posted to lean.org tomorrow. And so you can share and watch the recording, and we'll follow up with an email with more information about the courses, as well as all the bundles and the promotions that Meja shared earlier. Thank you so much, everybody. And thanks again, Meja. Farewell.
All right. Thanks, Matt. Thanks, Taylor.